Hello my loves and welcome to yet another episode of Fluffenhammer Adjacent, and in this episode I really want to talk to you about an old favourite of mine, the novel Storm of Iron by Graham McNeill. Storm of Iron, pretty old book now. It came out, it was originally published way back when I was a young 20-something, during the heydays of 3rd Ed 40k, sort of towards the latter part of 3rd Ed 40k, to coincide with the then 3.5 Chaos Space Marine Codex, the totally redone, rehashed Chaos Space Marine Codex, which, as those of you who were around at the time remember, was contentious and was a total experiment. It was a completely different thing from any of the other codices that were around at the time, and is still generally regarded as one of the best codices ever written. It was such an interesting, mutable piece of work, that codex. You could do so much with it. It had things like veteran skills that you could apply to units and to characters. It had the marks of chaos. It had demonic gifts. It had demonic steeds. It had the ability to tailor armies to different chaos cults and to different chaos legions and all sorts of stuff. And as those of you who were around at the time probably remember, Iron Warriors were the thing back then. The Iron Warriors list in the 3.5 Codex was incredible. The Index Astartes article detailing the full background of the Iron Warriors had been published not that long ago in White Dwarf, and in a couple of in a couple of volumes of the Index Astartes as well. And it was one of the best articles. It was really interesting. It went very deep into the psychology and history of the Iron Warriors, what caused them to turn and side with Horus, what their relationship was with the Chaos Powers, what they were doing since their demon world, the ascension of Perturabo, their Primarch, and so on and so forth. It was a really good article that lent them such a dense level of character. Iron Warriors became incredibly popular, and the entry for the Iron Warriors in the 3.5 Codex was amazing. They could swap out elites and fast attack options on the force organization chart for heavy support. So you could take enormous amounts of ordnance in an Iron Warriors army, and they had a special entry which was a Basilisk. The Basilisk is a really big weapon from the Imperial Guard. They could use that. They were the only Chaos force that could. Really interesting, really fascinating force. Very cool indeed. They could also upgrade any character to a Warsmith, which later of course became the Warp Smith, which we now can be taken by practically anyone. So they were a very interesting, unique and unusual army back then, and also very good on the tabletop. Very powerful indeed. In fact, had to be really, they were one of the reasons why the 3.5 Codex was toned down so much in later editions, because they were a little bit abusable with the Iron Warriors back then. But then again, that whole codex was abusable. Does anyone remember the Emperor's Children Demon Princes, the Slanesh Demon Princes you could build from that list? It was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You could craft monsters from that codex that makes the Primarchs, like the demon Primarchs, of now pale in comparison. They were absurd. Anywho, Storm of Iron came out on the back of that, and this was way back at the very beginning of the Black Library label. The Black Library, the publishing house of Games Workshop, really wasn't what it is now back then. It was really in its nascent state. It was very much in its infancy. This was before the days of the Horus Heresy novels. The Horus Heresy novels hadn't yet been published, and they wouldn't come out for another couple of years yet. So the global phenomena that was the Horus Heresy series hadn't entrenched the Black Library as an established part of Games Workshop. It was more just a label, really. And Storm of Iron was arguably one of the most popular novels at the time. And one of the reasons it was so popular is unlike many of the novels that had come before, many of the stories that had come before, it gave Chaos a voice. It gave the Chaos Space Marines a voice. It's written from multiple different perspectives. There's really not one protagonist, although there are two real consistent characters, and they are Honsuo, the Iron Warrior, and Guardsman Hawk, who is just this raggedy, not really very good Imperial Guardsman who ends up becoming a bit of a hero by the end. Both of them are heroic in their own particular ways. They are both the protagonists of this story. And this story gives them both equal time and equal legitimacy. It is not the case that the Iron Warriors are just frothing monsters and maniacs and lunatics and sadists. They are all of that, but they're more than that. You know, Honsuo has a very particular agenda and tension to him. One of the most interesting things about Honsuo is that he is not one of the ancient Iron Warriors. There are ancient Iron Warriors amongst the war band that he's part of, one of whom is an established character, Foryx, who we will be seeing later on throughout the Horus Heresy, of course. Barb and Falk, who we'll be seeing in the Horus Heresy novels again. In this book, like 10,000 years later, Barb and Falk is something completely different from how he will appear later on in the Horus Heresy. He is on the verge of demonhood at this point. He is an entirely other entity, but it gives a voice to these forces and these powers in a way that they kind of hadn't had up until this point. It basically lends characters that would have traditionally just been cast as monsters and antagonists and as the manifestations of an almost stereotypical evil monster villain, as rounded and interesting characters. Honsuo, for example, he is a young Iron Warrior, relatively speaking. He wasn't around during the Horus Heresy. He was created from captured gene seed and gene stock much later on, during the Long War itself. So he was born in the midst of the Long War, and so is treated with a degree of contempt as a kind of whelp, you know, as a half-breed, as someone who hasn't been tempered in the fires of hatred and war that the veteran Iron Warriors have. That's particularly true in his interactions with Foryx. Foryx, who, as we know, has been around, literally was at the gates of Terra. Foryx was at the siege of Terra 10,000 years ago. The interesting thing, this is the first novel in which Foryx appears. This is his debut, but it's also his end. This is the end of his story. So you have to go back to the Horus Heresy stories that deal with the Iron Warriors to see where he's come from, to see the route that he's taken up to this point. Foryx himself is a very interesting character. He's been fighting for 10,000 years, and so he's burnt out. He doesn't know what he's fighting for anymore. He's forgotten so much, and is embittered and weary, and doesn't really understand what he's fighting for. Outside of, like, immediate goals and interests, he doesn't understand what the Long War is for. It's gone on for too long. It's consumed too much of his life and his existence and his psyche, so there is nothing left of him. But during the course of this particular battle, the siege of Hydrocaudatus, he reignites, something reignites in his soul, and he starts to see possibility beyond the material concerns that have consumed him up until this point. And it's really fascinating. It's great to see these characters going through those arcs. There's Krieger again, who has been around since the Horus Heresy days. In this book, Krieger is just a monster. Krieger is consumed by the path of Khorne, so he is a complete and utter lunatic. But even he has sort of an interesting arc to follow as a result of his interactions with a prisoner that he takes, who he has some very, very tense and interesting discussions with. All of the characters are given some intrigue, all of them. From the Imperial Marines, there's a sort of small band of Imperial Fists who turn up at one point, to the Adeptus Mechanicum forces, whose motivations and agendas are rather murky, to the Imperial Guardsmen and the staff who are stationed upon the citadel of Hydrochordatus. All of them have a degree of intrigue given to them. And it's really fascinating to have read, for the first time, way back when I was like 21, 22, a story that really gives you a sense of what it feels like to exist within the Imperium as a human being, you know? Which is it's not a good thing. It is not a good thing by any way, shape or measure. You are entirely disposable. And there's a very dystopian subplot in this story that makes that overt, makes that absolutely overt. It's quite a fun book, this one. It is a war, so there is a lot of the sort of what people call the bolter porn, the war porn stuff, where it is just these incredible, expansive descriptions of sorties and of clashes and battles between titans and knights and regiments of Imperial Guard and squads of Iron Warriors and so on and so forth. There's a lot of violence, which is really well rendered. The actual besieging of the fortress of Hydrochordatus is really well rendered. You really get a sense of the scale of the fortress and of what it takes to besiege this thing. I mean, there is a titan here. There is a corrupted Imperator titan that again has survived since the Horus Heresy, which attacks the walls of this citadel, and the sense of it is so phenomenally epic. It's really well drawn. Graham McNeill is one of the best of the Black Library writers. He's one of the better of the writers who would go on to write for the Horus Heresy. Some of his other works, some of his really notable works, are things like Fulgrim, the Emperor's Children book, the Angel Exterminatus, which deals with the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's Children, bringing together obviously two of his favourite subjects and really exemplifying what they are and how they function. He's a very, very good writer in that regard. I notice he's very good at writing both distinct and interesting and dynamic characters and also a sense of place. He's very good at emphasizing what the setting feels like and what it's like to operate within it for different types of creatures. So you really get like the minutiae of what it feels like to be an Iron Warrior Chaos Space Marine in this dust-strewn wasteland, you know, suffering all manner of discomforts and whatnot. It's really cool that being a besieged soldier inside the fortress where your rations are running low and you are in fear of not only for your life but your mortal soul. He's very, very good at that. There's a great sense of economy to the story. It doesn't really outstay its welcome. It's a good grind, you know. It's a good, fun, pulpy bit of science fiction war porn with a little bit of chaos-tinged horror thrown in as well. There's some really great sequences where, certainly involving the Warsmith Barban Falk, he is besieging Hydrochordatus because his time is nigh, basically. He's on the edge of transformation, ascension into a demon prince. And so he's an icon of not only veneration but horror. He's very difficult to look at and to be near because the powers of chaos are suffusing him and he's on the edge of transformation. He is like insanity made manifest, and when he does actually ascend, it's absolutely brilliant. Graham McNeill is very good at describing the metaphysics of chaos. I've noticed that through and through. He does it in Angel Exterminatus when Fulgrim ascends. He does it in Fulgrim when the Emperor's Children are starting to commune with the powers of chaos for the first time. He really does have a sense of that, and it's derived, I think, largely from his wider reading. He's obviously a fan of Clive Barker, and Clive Barker is an excellent metaphysician and a fan of the Romantics. So he's a fan of William Blake and of Byron and Coleridge, who are themselves great metaphysicians, you know. Their metaphysics is part and parcel of their writings, and he incorporates that imagery into his work and marries it to the slightly more frivolous sort of the wargaming stuff that you find in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and it works really, really well. Going back to it this time and rereading it as part of the Iron Warriors trilogy, it was great fun. It was great fun. I haven't read it for a very, very, very long time, but it was great to see that it hasn't really aged at all. It really does work very, very well. It's amongst the better of the novels I have read from the Black Library, and certainly those involving chaos. Graham McNeill is one of the writers that does chaos very, very well. The others I can think of, I can bring immediately to mind, are people like Nick Kime is very good, Chris Wright is very good, obviously... people like Aaron Dembski-Bowden is amazing. John French, very, very good indeed. But Graham McNeill is right up there. He does chaos very, very well. And he's very good at giving a voice to the bad guys, to the villains, making them a bit more interesting than just being the antagonists or the threat of the book, of the story. He's very good at making them seem to have agendas and motivations that are beyond just mere sadism or cruelty or whatever. It's very, very good read, lots of fun, hurtles along at a pace you wouldn't believe, and describes very, 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 very big epic things in a way that's clear and easily imagined, and just has this incredible sense of scale and moment to it. It's a very beautiful book, and I can see why it was so popular at the time. Certainly married to the popularity of Chaos and the Iron Warriors that was so pervasive at the time of publication, I can certainly see why people ate this up. And I'm really looking forward to going on and reading the other stories in the trilogy.